Okay, folks, we're back on Mike Coscarelli Rules. I have a very special guest joining me right now. You can hear this man's voice on K-Love in Dallas, WOGL in Philly, and the legendary WCBS-FM in New York City. You've also heard his voice on ABC television. We welcome to the show radio icon, Race Taylor. Race, thank you for joining us today.
I am blushing. Icon, please.
Icon. I wish I would have had more descriptive words to throw in there, but I'm not smart enough to figure that out.
That's a nice one. I'm going to use it on Words with Friends. Am I dating myself?
Words with Friends, maybe a little bit, a couple years,
okay,
perhaps.
All right. What's a decade?
For the people that might not know who you are, because your voice is legendary, at least in the tri-state, in other places too, because you've done so much voiceover work and everything too. But how long have you been in radio and broadcasting? I mean, it's got to be 30 years. Am I right?
Not bad. Yeah. Once upon a time, you needed a license. You had to pass a test and do all kinds of math, calculating power and wattage and all this other stuff. And that was like the mid 80s. So I remember being a nervous wreck, being in college, thinking I'm a music student. I'm too stupid to pass all this math. There's no way they're going to give me this license. And that was the mid 80s. And my first full-time job was in the late 80s. So what is that? That's at least 10 years.
Yeah, you've been around for about 10 years.
Right. So it started like that, really.
Is that right? They had a wattage test for you to be a DJ?
You had to be able to calculate power and make sure, you could adjust the transmitter if necessary, all that stuff. There's an actual landline.
I hear that. Tell them that you're... Race out of the gate. Race sounds like a 75-year-old man.
That's right.
Back in my day, we had to calculate wattage.
Why did we all that stuff?
Why? So why? What was the reason that you guys had to know all that stuff?
I think you had to take these readings every hour and then mark them down and initial them because it was an official legal document. Now there are computer programs that measure all that stuff, but I think they had to make sure you weren't, sending out too much power.
Right. Okay. Well, all right. So some background for the listener. We actually talked about you a little bit last week, Race, because we had talked with last week's guest, JL Covan, about the Springsteen podcast, and we had thoughts on that.
Yeah.
And one of the things we had mentioned you because I had told the story, and I don't know if you fully remember this, but a couple of years ago, when we were all still part of the PLJ clan in New York, Sting was coming with Shaggy. Do you remember this? Sting and Shaggy came in.
Absolutely. The Grammys were downstairs in New York City.
That's right. It was the Grammys, and we were having all these interviews come up. But Sting was like this big fish that we landed because I remember how intense the whole situation was, because it was like we have Sting for 15 minutes. We only have him for 15 minutes, and who's gonna do the interview? Who are we gonna get? And it was like the fucking the sea parted, and it was like Race Taylor is doing this interview. It's like who's the guy who can get in there 15 minutes, do a nice tight interview with a rock star, like a rock legend, with all these people. I remember there was a memo going around on the floor. People weren't allowed to go in and talk to him or take pictures. It was literally in, out. We have to get this. And you just unflappable. Just it was like watching a cowboy walk into a studio and just be like, oh yeah, I got it, no problem. So when you started in the business, is that the pull? Is the pull the idea of being the guy that does the interview with the rock star? Is the pull for you playing music? Obviously, I can't imagine the pull for you was recording wattage for the radio station.
Absolutely,
but it seems like that was part of the gig.
Right. Well, oddly enough, if you go back 20 years, just about from that Grammy interview that you were part of, my first real superstar interview at PLJ was Sting, and I was petrified.
Yeah.
He had a burgeoning solo career, but all anyone ever wanted to do was ask him about, when are the Police getting back together? And, he couldn't come to the room without you asking that. So you get some sage advice from other people, and you save that for the very end. And hopefully he's warmed up to you and he knows that you're not trying to get him, and he'll be happy to answer that question. But in the very beginning, one of my first part-time shifts I did on the air in a significant market in Cincinnati, Ohio. They had this thing called, like, it was a Second Street party. Second Street runs along the river. And I worked for a top 40 station, WKRQ, Q102. And I just come from an oldies station in Dallas where I was playing like 50s and 60s oldies.
Yeah.
So I had a Richard Marx mullet and a bad mustache. And I'd show up at classic car shows and be able to talk about the Beatles and Dion and, you know, Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. And everyone would go, who are you? The guy I listened to on the air has curly gray hair and, you know, 200 more pounds on him. I just didn't sound like, you know, my voice. So I was dying to get back into top 40 music. And I finally landed a part-time job in Cincinnati. And one of my first shifts, they were doing this live remote, and they threw me in a trailer. And they're like, hey, you're talking to Firehouse. You know, hair band from the 80s, couple big ballads, a couple rockin' things. It was a big deal that we had them playing at this free concert, you know, outside of some bars on a street on a summer night. And I'm like, well, what am I going to talk to these guys about? And I had a music education. So without getting too deep into the process of songwriting and everything else, I've just felt like, well, these are my people. I'm comfortable, you know. I didn't have the hair yet. I couldn't rock a sleeveless shirt and stonewashed jeans.
Yeah.
But I could talk with them, and I felt like I could carry the conversation and go off of a list of things that I thought were important. And then you have to realize, over the course of time, you know, I spent so many hours watching like Letterman at night, who, when it comes to the art of the interview, I mean, this guy, and I know there's a lot of heat about a lot of different topics and a lot of different guests right now, but you have to realize, you know, late night television or daytime talk shows have 6 minutes to get the job done. They need to promote whatever the artist wants to, hopefully have a moment for them to shine, tackle something that is obviously rote. Oh, you're here to talk about the new album. Tell me about the new album. And then maybe uncover something unknown to the audience that makes your interview different from everybody else. So I would watch Letterman all the time thinking, how can he do this with politicians and actresses and musicians and newscasters? You know, when Peter Jennings or Tom Brokaw would show up and they would talk, it would be as fascinating as Julia Roberts or Cher, who hated him.
Yeah, right.
And you loved being the audience member watching that tension. Where me then, several years later, thinking, well, I'm going to ask Sting about the Police, and it's the last thing he wants to talk about. Inside, you're sweating bullets and your mind is turning, and it's not a comfortable situation, but you pray to God that when you listen back, it sounds like a conversation that flows, something that's, you know, engaging. So, yeah.
Well, the difference between somebody like you and Letterman, radio, obviously, for the longest time, I mean, radio was such a tastemaker in the music industry.
Sure.
And when I was in like doing radio stuff in college, and I was very interested in the idea of kind of playing records that people hadn't heard before. I say records because I'm a 75-year-old man too.
That's okay. Now that vinyl's so huge, right?
I know, yeah.
CDs, you can say records.
We're back, but like the idea of kind of like being a music aficionado. You're interviewing a lot of, obviously you guys have, as long of a career that you've had, you've interviewed all types of different people, but when you're interviewing musicians specifically, do you think that being a musician yourself also kind of breaks them in a way that, because I don't know that Letterman, at a certain point, you think that Letterman, the one thing that he has that's relatable to some of these people is that at a certain point, he's also really famous. So in some ways, it sort of feels like you have to be again, going back to this Obama Springsteen conversation, it's like at a certain point, who else they can speak to each other sort of like equals in a weird way, because they're just
a fascinating conversation. Sure.
Right. They're iconic in different ways, but they transcend a certain type of, it's not just like an interviewer talking to Obama, a guy who's like a professional interviewer, writes for paper or something like that. Do you think being able to talk to, like, would that make somebody like Sting light up if you'd be like, yeah, man, like, I've been around music forever. Like does it make him feel like you're one of his people in that way?
Well, you hope so. just like this, I'm rarely a guest, so this is exciting for me. I'm all of a sudden I'm on the other side of the questions, and I'm like, oh God, I want to be entertaining.
You're doing great.
So far, yeah, I'm having a blast. I hate looking at myself, but aside from that, it's a good time. But going back to that Grammy moment with Sting, he and I had several conversations, including some very somber and poignant and musically important ones shortly after 9/11, when our 30th anniversary party was one of the first live musical events, and he came up to the radio station. So we had a history. So you hope that these people remember you and that they feel safe in your company, and that they can maybe open up a little bit and tell you some things that maybe even they forgot. And I had some great people along the way give me some advice about doing interviews. Tom Cuddy and Scott Shannon, and my boss before that in other markets, Jimmy Steele, were we had live events, and the times were different then. You had 10 minutes on the air with an artist and then a commercial break, and we'll be back and they'll play a song and more interviews. And now all of that stuff happens off the air, and you play here's the highlight, the rest of it's living online. And this is where the podcast space comes in, because there are people who long for long form conversation, for deeper subjects and in-depth answers and exploring some things. And the great thing about having a chance to talk to some of these people is you hoped, without boring everybody else, you uncovered something that people were waiting to discover, that the true fans wanted to know. That's the other thing. How do I appeal the mass person who maybe is a fringe fan, something that they need to know or didn't know, and the hardcore person who's heard them on 3 other television shows and a morning show and another radio station? What can I do that will set myself apart from them and make it entertaining? And I think the biggest thing a lot of people forget is this is, even in the podcast space, supposed to be entertainment.
Right. So it's a little twinge of fun, you would think.
Right, exactly. And the biggest thing about the podcast space, and that everyone who can do them, is just because you have one doesn't mean you're qualified to grow an audience.
Right. Well, this was a big thing that I wanted to talk about with you, because again, like, to give people some background on you are, I wouldn't say you, unless I'm wrong, you didn't have this type of career. You didn't really like kick around a bunch of too many smaller stations, right? I feel like you got to New York kind of quick. Am I right?
I don't know about quick, a decade, let's say, since I had my first full-time job.
I didn't realize it was even that long. I remember, I feel like I had conversations with you in the past, and in my mind, it was always like, because dude, I remember I grew up listening to PLJ, and I remember hearing your voice as a young person, and that for me had to have been 20 years ago, I think, right? So, yeah, that sounds about right. So to me,
makes sense. 2001. Right?
I was just like, yeah, the race has just always been in New York, and race has always been, because I can't really remember a time where I would hear the radio and you wouldn't be on it in New York.
Holy cow.
So, but working in this business, so many people that kick around these smaller. I knew this dude that worked at ABC, who we both know, who will remain nameless, but an older guy who had been in radio since, I guess, sometime in the 70s, maybe, or maybe the early 80s, just been market to market to market to market. And, eventually ended up being kind of like a board operator at ABC, which is like a kind of like the job that I was doing at first. You wouldn't think that somebody who had been around that long would end up there. Not the point that I'm trying to make, but the point is essentially like, these years of experience and going from this place to this place and competing here and learning from this person and learning over there, that's definitely something that doesn't exist as much anymore in the podcast space, because I think people will just pick it up and just do that. Do you think that is a necessary path, though, to be good at this?
Well, I don't think there is one specific path. The other thing about traveling from market to market to market is when you started at small towns and you were on it, 2:00 in the morning at Dayton, Ohio, you could make mistakes.
Right.
And you could be called on the carpet and hopefully, be invited to come back to work the next week and everything would be fine.
Right.
I worked in Toledo and southern Detroit. There's no real place called South Detroit, but downriver Detroit, Dayton, Columbus, and then Cincinnati and Dallas. So I did my fair share of nomadic stuff. But even when I started, I'm like, well, here's a 4-mile radius from where I grew up outside of Detroit, Michigan. Look at all the places where I could work and still be, at my parents' table for lunch on Sunday if they needed me or whatever.
Right.
And then it was my wife's adventurous spirit when we had an opportunity to go to Dallas. It just said, let's go. Let's see what happens. And being nomadic was part of the learning experience then, because you had to travel and go to these places because they had the gear and the technology and the signal. And now, we're in our offices, our home studios, our closets, our rooms, some people, I've seen photos of rigs during this pandemic where people are at their kitchen countertop.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But all of that, that nomad kind of things, I was prepared for it to a certain extent. And then once I realized that, that maybe I would gain a little more credibility once I walked out the door somewhere, which proved to be the point.
Yeah.
That it wasn't so bad. And I learned so much, and, we became like a team. We relied on ourselves to learn and to grow and all those other things. I mean, I tried for interior promotions many, many times at all these radio stations.
Yeah.
And they never wanted me till I was like, I have an offer over here. I'm going to see you.
Right.
And then I was like, but wait, we were going to move you to here and give you this much money, and it was kind of a different learning experience than the casting space now.
Well, to me, it seems like, and I've said this already, like you're the consummate broadcast professional. Out of everybody that I've ever worked with, it's always been Race Taylor is like the go-to for good advice. B, you're extremely approachable and like always have been, talks to the interns, talks to, everybody. And from being in this business that is not necessarily common. Hosts have egos and they can be not the nicest at times. Working for Imus was a very different experience from working down the hall with you. You know what I mean? Right. You were afraid of him. I was never afraid of you.
Well, good. Makes me happy.
Yeah, it's great.
You have a different teaching methodology than someone else may have. And I was an
Is that what we're going to call it?
Yeah, we're going to safely call it a different demeanor, a different personal style. I remember, the first time I had an internship at an NPR station in college. I was ready to walk away from the music school thing because I was completely burned out. And my mother recommended, why don't you walk into the radio station?
Yeah.
Hair on your face, your voice is low. See what's happening.
Yeah.
And I had an internship splicing together interviews. Like every lecture hall was wired into the NPR station. So if a guy was talking about biochemistry or marketing or finance, they recorded the interview and then they played them back at 12:30, and it had to be a half-hour interview.
Is that what it was? It was it was a literal lecture that they just
right. Yeah, they would they would do the news and whatever they needed, and then before they went to classical music at 1:00, here was the part of the lecture series.
Oh God! And you were how old doing that?
Junior in college. I don't know what age that is.
Like 19, 20.
20. Right. So first of all, you're hoping you've got everything patched in so you can record it.
Yeah.
On a reel-to-reel player that's the size of a dishwasher.
Yeah.
And then they tell you've got to edit it. Well, this guy talked for an hour and 10 minutes, but we only need 30 minutes. Or maybe you can make it 2 parts and we'll run it on Thursday and Friday.
Right.
And you're trying to edit out the pauses and the unmiked questions from the back and making it work. And the people that I worked for, valued my work. If they needed it by Friday at 11, so it could go on at 12, they had it in plenty of time. And, and then with all of that came some other opportunities. All of a sudden I have a key to the building and it's a state-of-the-art studio. And they're like, we shut off. We're dark overnight from midnight to 6. So if you want to come in and use a production room, go play radio.
Yeah. You play around a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
So I learned on my own in the dark.
Right. Well, that's the thing. what advice would you give somebody that's just picking up a microphone at this point? Because it doesn't seem like the path that existed even when I was kind of coming up exists anymore. I feel like I was part of the last phase of people that came in.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, it just doesn't seem like, even with the corporatization of radio and stuff like that, those like entry level jobs don't really exist the way that they did even 10 years ago, I feel like. So that does kind of mean like the next generation of, right.
Right. But we will always need stories to be told. There's going to be a different path, and there's going to be a different means to listen to it.
Yeah.
Eventually, is it all going to be on the internet? I mean, there will be, man, it's just, this is hours and hours of philosophy and conversation as to how things will be broadcast and to what attention span do people have. And even if you look at it from a monetary standpoint, there are all these companies that still have money to spend to get their message out.
Yeah.
I would like to think it's still going to be over the air. The means is still there, but now we deliver it also, online.
What was the first time that you started seeing the shift to digital where you were like, oh boy, things are changing? Do you remember, is there a seminal moment where you were just like, oh man, they want me to do a video? I'm not a video, or something.
I think there was kind of that, the photos for everything as it started in the early 2000s. And the part of the great magic of radio from the early days was the mystery. It was a voice, and in your mind, you conjured up what everybody looked like.
Right.
You waited, even in the late 80s, you waited for Friday night videos because you had no idea, what does Samantha Fox look like? Everyone's talking about Samantha Fox, or Paul Abdul, or whoever. The mystery of everything is kind of gone, as is the joy that comes with the anticipation. I was talking to my brother the other day about drumming and musical things.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a Paul Simon song that he was trying to learn how to play called Late in the Evening. Steve Gadd is the drummer. It's an unbelievable groove. And he couldn't find the record at a record store an hour outside of Detroit, and no radio stations were really playing it. And he'd already read everything he could read about it in Modern Drummer magazine, and he couldn't get his hands on the music itself because it's not available like it is now.
Right.
So the joy that came with, me putting it on a cassette and sending it to him from my part-time radio job a state away was like, oh my God, here it finally is.
Yeah.
You've already, exhausted everything you could possibly figure out about it. Finally, you get it. Now, if you want a song, you don't even have to buy it. It's available online somewhere.
Yeah.
There's no waiting. There's no, the immediacy of everything almost, for the good of all of that is it also takes away some of the specialness of the achievement,
Yeah. I also, in my opinion, radio in a lot of ways was a communal thing, in the sense that now everybody listens to music through their headphones. So with Spotify, with Apple Podcasts, whatever, at least in New York City, you put your headphones on, you walk out into the world, and you're listening to your own thing whenever you feel like it. But I don't want to sound like a 70-year-old man, but I came to a lot of music and a lot of these things because it's not necessarily just music, but even some comedy bits and audio bits like that, like Mel Brooks, the 2,000-year-old man and all that stuff. I think I just got the number wrong, but whatever the Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner audio bits were, like I experienced all those things with my parents. So even when I go back to driving around in the car, listening to you on the radio, even if it's just my parents having tape cassettes or a CD player, I didn't know I didn't know any Beatles music until we were driving down to Florida, and my mom played like the Beatles. She had a CD in the car, and we were playing it. We had to plug it in, but we were experiencing it, the five of us together. And I remember hearing Strawberry Fields for the first time, and I was like, wait, this is the Beatles? What the fuck? I didn't know that this is the Beatles, And it was the same sort of thing. I learned about music and even comedy, the Eddie Murphy. My dad had cassette tapes, and I had a cassette player. And I would just like put them on and like learning all of these things communally was something that I think that you'd experience because you used to just have to be around people you're at the beach or you're at like an event or whatever, and the radio is on,
Right.
you know? And that's how you would get this new music, as opposed to now, you know, Spotify will recommend it to you on an algorithm. I don't hate it, but it's not the same as experiencing it the way that you used to be able to experience with somebody else.
Of discovery.
Yeah.
Has changed. Right.
Right. I get
and
that.
Even my kids will talk about, you know, what it was like back then, and the idea of someone roller skating down Broadway with a boombox on their shoulder.
Right.
They're like, people did that?
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
It was either in your car or on your shoulder.
Yeah. All over New York. You're just hearing other people's music. you know?
Right. Exactly.
So having been involved with all that, realistically, as a DJ, there was an era where if the DJ, I always thought when I was a kid, and I know better now, but I always thought that the DJ on the radio, like the music would go directly to him, that like Fleetwood Mac or whoever would send Race Taylor like, hey Race, it's Mick Fleetwood. Here's the new tape. Like, let me know what you think. And then like Race would break it on the radio. And I know obviously now it's a little bit different. They, you know, the record companies work with the radio stations, and that's how it makes it into a rotation. But has there ever been a song that you would have to sort of introduce as, you know, the new, hey, we got the new Madonna or we got the new whatever, and you have to sort of hype it up as the DJ because that's part of your job, right?
Sure.
Has there ever been a song that you've gotten where you've been like, oh man, I don't think I can talk this thing up, but I have to?
I don't know, because I think part of the art is creating that energy. Even if you're taking the emphasis away from the song and putting it on the production, or putting it on the hook, or putting it on the excitement of discovering something new. You know, it's almost impossible for me, once I start hearing something in my headphones, to not be excited about it, I guess. And I think that is part of the, you know, the beauty of the medium is getting somebody else to enjoy it. And we talked about this the other day from a political standpoint, even with a song that you didn't believe was a hit record. At some point in time, you heard it so many times that you were like, oh, maybe I like this.
Yeah.
And then after more times, you're like, hey, this is a good song. And then all of a sudden, this is my favorite song.
Right.
So then when it comes to everything that was happening in politics, it was like, oh, someone's telling me this. I don't know if I believe that. But then they tell it to you over and over and over again. You're like, oh, maybe there's some truth to that. And then all of a sudden you hear it enough times where you're like, well, this must be true. Yeah. It's a crazy thing how the art of repetition works. But there were songs surely in my past that I didn't know that would be a hit song that ended up, you know, in the top 10. And I think the old adage is if everyone could pick a hit record, then we'd all be millionaires. Right. There's no telling what the population is going to gravitate toward, but there's something about the repetition of it, the comfort of it. And that's another thing that you, after all of that time, you were very gracious to, you know, mention how long I've been here. That invitation into people's lives in the best of times and worst of times, or in their car or in their home or in their kitchen, you hopefully over the course of that many years start to create some credibility. You know, you become part of their fabric, and they invite you to be there. And you just can't show up someplace. That's why it's so hard to be a new person and just bang, there you are. Right. It's kind of, it's like something you have to earn. Right. Indoctrinate yourself into people's lives in a way. Have you ever been surprised by a hit? Has there ever been a song where you've just been like, oh man, I can't believe we're playing this 2 times an hour because people love it so much. I don't get it. Well, never quite that frequently. Sometimes it seems like that, especially later, because once upon a time, you know, every radio station had their own songs that were part of their identity. Now a hit song shows up across the board. It's a top 40 hit. It's an adult hit. Yeah. You know, it may have crossed over from country. Yeah. It may be used in an advertising campaign, and then you're going to see them promote on television. So all of a sudden, a huge song, which once upon a time would live on one station in one format, suddenly it becomes omnipresent. It's everywhere.
Right.
Yeah, there are some songs and there are some artists that I don't quite understand that continue to have a mass appeal, and you know, it's the country, the nation, the audience's opinion, not mine. That's another thing. One of the first things that they told you was like, listen, you know, if you think you're going to get a job playing only the songs you like in a format you're comfortable with, your chances of working are, you know, that much smaller.
Right.
You're going to learn to love whatever it is that you're playing if you want to have any amount of success, because your passion for it, your feelings about it are what's contagious.
You're on an oldie station right now. CBS-FM in New York is a legendary oldie station. I guess it's been oldies as long as I can remember, but oldies always changes. And
classic hits, I think, is the term right now.
It's called classic hits now, no longer. So yeah, when I was a kid, oldies was doo-wop, you know, and the doo-wop shop was something that. Say that again. I think you broke up.
Oh, I'm sorry. 50s and 60s.
Yeah. So when you were saying before about talking to the Cincinnati people about Dion and all of these old artists, that was, you know, driving around Brooklyn with my mom. That's what we would listen to, was, you know, Little Anthony and the Imperials and all that stuff. But now it's 2021, and what does oldies, or what does classic hits mean now? Because we're talking 2000 being 21 years ago. If we do a transfer of time, that would have been the equivalent of hearing music from sometime in the late 60s or the early 70s in the 90s when I was listening to it with my mom. So what's a classic hit now?
You know, I think the hyper focus and the passion right now, as the audience continues to age and evolve with the passing of time, it's still on the 80s. And the time will come.
Okay.
When do we begin to, and how much of the 90s do you introduce?
Okay.
Because there was a part of pop music in the 90s, what was considered pop music in the 90s, that became very fragmented. I mean, what started it in 1990 and 1991 by, you know, 92 and 94, when Nirvana and Pearl Jam are all of a sudden on top 40 radio stations. You know, how can you have one place that'll play Richard Marx, Tony Braxton, Nirvana, Young MC, Tone Loc?
Right.
I mean, there was just so much fragmentation that you entered a very different era for music. So what is classic hits going to be in the future? That, you know, we'll have to wait and see what the audience will tell us.
So you guys are on that threshold right now where the 90s, whatever the 90s mix for these classic hits could be anything. Are you guys sneaking Nirvana in? Do you think that could happen?
No, not Nirvana. I think in the past on a Friday or a Saturday, you might have heard a Beastie Boys track, or, you know,
on CBS?
Something along those lines. And then I want to say Broadway Bill Lee told me a couple tracks he's played in the past. And I'm like, really?
That's kind of blows my mind. Right. Especially because I always, and I think that my parents, I don't necessarily want to throw anybody under the bus by saying this, but I think that for a period of time, something that was defined as oldies or classic was also in part defined that way because of the type of attitude the music had with it. And I think that a lot of the older music is, you know, for lack of a better word, edgeless. You know, there's somebody like Glenn Campbell, who I've been listening to a lot of lately.
Okay.
Because again, I'm 75. He's awesome. And
I hope you're listening to Galveston, for crying out.
I love Galveston. It's become one of my favorite songs. It's so great. And I didn't know how good of a guitar player he was until, you know, I started watching these YouTube videos. I'm really interested in this guy. And he's kind of considered easy listening. Like, I think that he's a country singer, but this era of music, even leading up to that, like doo-wop and all this music from the 60s and even into the early 70s, sort of felt classic because it was innocent in a weird way. And that's why it's so weird for me to hear that like the Beastie Boys now, who were controversial, are now or even the Madonna or Prince or any of these people moving into that era. They're definitely classic as far as I'm concerned, because they came before I did, and their music has sort of lived on. But it's also like, I wonder if that plays into this at all, because if you're programming it, I guess you have to program it for younger people, but this is like a puzzle to put together now. I feel like this genre in particular is the one where it's just sort of like, how do we solve this puzzle? Because who are we trying to get younger people to listen to? Oh, like, I can't even really put it into words, the thing that I'm trying, because it's so enigmatic in my head that I'm just sort of like, what is the formula? Because the formula seems to, like, I love the Beastie Boys. I listen CBS Rules, but like I also sort of listen to CBS even as a young person for like, to hear the Rascals or to hear like, you know what I mean?
But this is not the first time that we have hit this cycle. The change is constant. Like at one point in time, someone said, "Hey, listen, we can't play Little Anthony and the Imperials next to Steppenwolf."
Right.
Like at some point in time, someone said, we can't play whatever rock song from someone in the mid 70s next to than what the Bee Gees were doing.
Right.
Or we can't play Steppenwolf next to the Bee Gees if you're looking as the era continues.
Right.
It seems like we were nostalgic for the 80s before we were really into the mid 90s. I mean, I remember being on the air and we had a Time Warp Lunch feature that was playing all these 80s songs, and the 80s weren't even 5 or 6 years old. Yeah. I don't know that we have that nostalgic connection yet, for songs from the early 2000s. I think we're starting to see it for the 90s, and specific songs are in there. Like one of the newest songs we might play is Smooth on CBS-FM. Just like in Philly, I'm playing Motown Philly from Boys to Men.
Yeah.
And in Dallas, I might be playing a ZZ Top track or something else that is specific to that market. That might not be as big countrywide, but it's just amazing when it comes to the evolution of the format that we have to continue to follow, what's happening with time. What song, if you're trying to hold on to a 50-year-old person, they want to listen to the radio station to feel young and maybe to spark some memories of their youth.
Yeah.
So what can you play for them that whether you're a new music station or a classic hit station, what does the audience want? What will they listen to or, stand for that will be considered, what still fits the brand, I guess, is maybe the best kind of angle I'm looking for.
I feel like we're at a very strange crossroads because popular music, the way it's always existed, it doesn't really exist before sometime in the 40s, maybe the 30s. I mean, you have all these little sections where we had jazz music and everything, but the idea of a pop star and pop music, I feel like starts with like the Bing Crosbys and the Sinatras and those types of guys. I guess you had a couple singers before that too, but the idea of being a big radio star, I feel like does kind of start with that early rock and roll music on the radio. And now if the oldie stations are kind of phasing or have phased a lot of that music out, the question is, as we keep moving forward, as time keeps moving forward, as a spectator, do you think that just sort of goes away? The idea that is there a place where the legacy of that type of music can really live on, or do we just lose an era of music because now we're just moving into a place where we're so far removed? At a certain point, like that music's going to be 100 years old. We're not that far from that. And I don't know. It's the same sort of thinking. Like in 1950, did they want to listen to music from like the late 1800s?
Well, there weren't quality recordings then. And it was
there weren't.
Really, the Wi-Fi in the 60s was just awful. I can't download my playlist.
Yeah, terrible Wi-Fi.
Here's the thing. I remember being a kid, and while I played, like I made money playing in bands, and I played in 50s and 60s bands, and my parents always had, Elvis and the Beatles and all that stuff always playing. So I loved it. Whereas, my peers did not have any affinity for music from that era. Where I'm finding my kids now have a tolerance, maybe isn't the right word, but they like love 80s music. They'll listen to that. It's part of their experience. And, my youngest kid, a freshman in high school, has a Sinatra playlist, and he's got a lo-fi chill music playlist. And he's got a 50s and 60s doo-wop playlist because his older brother came back from college and said, "Hey, I heard these songs in a music history class that I took as an elective, and this is pretty cool." And all of a sudden, guess what? There's Little Anthony and the Imperials again.
Right.
There's all these other doo-wop groups. And I hope as a musically literate parent that you introduce them to those kind of things. But you have to realize also that not everybody looks at music like we who are sitting behind a microphone, or who played an instrument, or were in a high school band, or studied it to an nth degree to be able to, pass the time. Not everybody looks at music the same way, just like not everybody looks at radio like we look at radio. I can't believe how many people it's just an appliance. Yeah. It's in my car, I'll listen to it, or I have one in the kitchen,
part of the fridge.
Passion for it is completely different. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's one in my shower.
It's funny that you bring up the radio thing, because or the music thing. How not everybody is a aficionado of it. I mean, I have enough women in my dating apps that's proof that it's hard to have a conversation with somebody who's not very interested in it.
Right.
Especially when you have that taste. But I that's just something that makes me a little nervous, because I feel that way with movies too. Right. I grew up watching these older movies because my parents and my grandparents were into them, but it does feel like now it's sort of unique to be able to find somebody my own age to talk to them about some sort of any actual Americana nostalgia, whether it's movies, music, whatever. It just doesn't. It seems like it's hard, and it's all the stuff that I like. I just hate hearing that that stuff is going to get phased out. It's a bigger psychological problem for me, and I have to work on that. But this idea that it's just this music, to me, hearing Frankie Valli on CBS-FM is like the most New York thing. I used to be hanging around in the street, and you'd hear somebody drive by in a Cadillac, and with Sherry blasting out of there, and of course it was on CBS, and I don't know, it's just part of it. Like you said, with these old other stations that you go to, playing ZZ Top on Dallas, in Dallas, and Boyz II Men in Philly, it just feels like I'm nervous about losing this element of community and losing this sort of this medium that did kind of bring everybody together in a weird way. Do you still see radio as a tastemaker the way it's always been in terms of just the music industry? And
well, I always will, because I believe while a younger generation is turning their ears on discovery to Spotify and random playlists and algorithms, I think that radio is also what sells. Mm-hmm. I mean, an artist can make some money from streaming, but they're not going to really start to cash in until something gets sold. And how do most people hear it on the air? If we were to talk to any of the artists from the past, and I know this is an ever-changing and evolving conversation, but top 40 stations in New York City in the 2000s and 2010s, we moved product.
Yeah,
it was great. And there was never an artist that said, we really didn't see any uptick, or I really didn't get wealthy because you played me on the air. That conversation never happened.
Right.
As soon as you made it to, a top 40 station, and I'm not only in New York, but it happened market to market to market. There was a wider breadth of discovery, and discovery led to sales, and sales led to more money for the artists, the publishers, the labels, the opportunity for then those songs to be part of movie soundtracks or pivotal roles in TV shows or whatever. I think you cannot discount 290 million people on a weekly basis still using the product at some point in time. Is it fragmented? Is it different? Is there more competition? Absolutely. There always will be. And there will be people that said that radio was going to die, when television made the scene.
Right.
We're still
here. How many decades have you been hearing that?
It always. Are people listening less and less? Are younger people not listening as much? It's evident. However, once you put these young people in a car and tell them they have to drive someplace and get somewhere, and they need some sense of community or some more information, whether it's weather or traffic or some of the other elements that radio brings, I think there will always be the need for a communal experience, the thing that you talk about that you miss so much and you think is going to be gone. Time marches on. The songs may change.
Yeah.
You cannot stop that part, but that's where the job as the host comes in to weave it all in. I like to think that if I'm not introducing someone to a song that is new, I'm maybe introducing them to a fact that is new, that is helping create that bond with an artist they may know, or some information on a song they've heard a million times but did not know this certain element or part about it. It's all, I truly believe that it is all connected. We're just competing with those moments now with so many other things that we didn't before. But still, the biggest thing that gets people to turn off music in their car, I hope it's radio first, but whether it's a playlist, your iTunes library, if anyone still listens like that, the biggest thing is a human conversation. Right. People used to always say, hey, does satellite radio, how much does that take away from what's happening with you? And the conversation was always never as much as someone being, on the telephone talking to someone. That's when you truly become into the background.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. There will always be the need for someone else to share what is happening, because what is happening when you finally hear something that you love? What's the first thing you want to do? You want to share it with someone else. You don't take 100%. Your favorite song and keep it to yourself.
No, never. It immediately goes into a playlist for a friend.
or even with my kids, it's like, hey, did you ever hear this song from Run DMC? Or did you know this about Aerosmith or whatever? And I'm just picking some, artists that they would say at random that we've had conversations about. First thing I want to do is have a conversation with someone else about it.
Totally. And I think there's always an element. There's something about being first to the band. Like when you discover somebody, that's why I think they're the issue with like the indie music scene for a while. It got to this point where it was like, once the band is mainstream, people are like, fuck them. Like we're done with them, But again, going back to the like sharing those moments with my parents, like my dad, I don't think was a huge music person, but I remember hearing Prince for the first time, and it was with my dad. And it was around the time I started getting into music. And I think my dad took a lot of, I remember being in the car with him. He's like, you got this. Do you know Prince? And I was like, yeah. I've heard of him, whatever. I don't really know. I don't listen to his music. He stinks. He's from the 80s. I had this thing about the 80s, like to stick up my ass for a long time. Where I was like, if they were any good, they would have made music in the 70s or whatever. And my dad was telling me, he's like, it was Let's Go Crazy. And there's that solo in Let's Go Crazy.
Oh, yeah. It's awesome.
Yeah. My dad goes, he's one of the best guitar players ever. You've got to listen. Like you got to listen to this guitar solo. And I remember thinking like, come on, like, Jimi Hendrix or Eric Clapton, like whatever. And I was such a snob. And then I started getting into Prince after that. I started listening to it. I was like, oh shit, my dad was kind of right. I think he takes a lot of pride. Anytime my dad can sort of like, and I'm sure you feel that too as a dad, where you're just like, your kids are discovering, your kids who are music fans are discovering this stuff, and you kind of like break one open on them. You're like, yeah, you like that. Like,
right.
Have you heard Steelers Wheel? Like, got to get you a Steelers Wheel album. Like, you don't even know these guys. Your mind's about to be blown or some shit. You know what I mean? But
yeah, I don't know if I'll pick Steelers Wheel.
I'm literally thinking of things that I listened to like this week.
Right. Exactly.
I had a couple of music questions for you before we get out of here, because I know you've been very gracious with your time, and I don't want to keep you here all night. But there's a couple of things going back to the idea of us having the classic conversation and what makes something classic. When these lists come out, because realistically, music radio as a medium is adjacent to music magazines and music blogs, people that have opinions on music. You guys are, tastemakers in that way too. Let's say, I don't know if you saw in the fall, Rolling Stone went back and revised their 500 greatest albums list, and they tried to make it a little more current. And they did something in my mind that was egregious, and they dropped Sgt. Pepper's down to I think it was 24 or something. They put other Beatles albums. Yeah, that's how I felt too. I thought it was insane. But do you have an opinion? Do you care when you see things like this? When this makes it around, because it feels like now Rolling Stone or some of these magazines they'll make something, they'll do something like that to garner up some sort of internet conversation. Because now you can have that conversation in real time. If I see that that list gets revised, I can hop on Twitter immediately and be like, I can't fucking believe that Sgt. Pepper's 25th. What are they thinking? What changed in 60 years or however long it's been? Do you have opinions on stuff like that? Do you like to see those lists get revised? Do you think it's necessary? Do you think that even some of this I think part of the issue with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Rolling Stone was the conversation for a lot of years about whether hip hop music should be on these lists, because it's so different from rock music, rock and roll music, that kind of the music that started this whole thing. Do you have any opinions on really any of the 12 things that I just said?
I do to a certain extent. Yes. I mean, I hope that these people are doing something that reflects the societal needs and the passage of time. Just because Rolling Stone maybe came out with this list in 2001 or 2005, well, 15 years have passed since then. Right. A lot of art and a lot of music has been released. So there needs to be some revisions. But my problem with the Sgt. Pepper conversation is just from the recording technology and the overdubbing and the multi-tracking alone, that album should never be out of the top 10.
Well, they also
groundbreaking from sound layering alone.
Yeah, they kept Pet Sounds number 2, and I mean, it just doesn't make much sense to me that the reason that Pet Sounds is at number 2 is because it inspired Sgt. Pepper's, which was number 1. Because Pet Sounds critically was not, until all those years later, was not considered a great album. And, a lot of people still don't fully get it. So I just don't understand. I think that there is just so much Beatles hate at this point because they've been considered the biggest band of all time, that I think it's sort of a move from music people to sort of zig and be like, oh, Sgt. Pepper's actually not that great. And you're just like, what are you talking about, man? What's changed? What has changed in however many years since it's come out, that all of a sudden, like a Lauryn Hill album is better than Sgt. Pepper? Sgt. Pepper, weren't we all in agreement that was the one untouchable album? I don't know what the hell has changed.
The level of genius.
Yeah. And influence, pushing the limits of what you can do with a pop album. None of these things would exist without that album existing. This was a conversation that I wanted to have in September, but I didn't have a podcast at the time because I was furious. And the Joni Mitchell album is on there at number 3. It just felt like they've revised that list to piss me off specifically. And I just remember looking at this just Abbey Road is not better than Sgt. Pepper's. Doesn't make any sense.
Right. But also, to answer your question, and another reason why I'm a guest on a podcast and not a host on a podcast is I don't know that I carry strong enough opinions about a lot of things like that. It's not that I don't have them, but it's my life is to reflect a whole bunch of little things. So I feel like I know a lot of little things about a ton of stuff, but not enormously deeply passionate enough to climb that hill on a bunch of other things. So when I see a list like that, I'm like, I'm going to think about this, and I might disagree with it on certain point by point basis. But from an opinion standpoint, it's not going to rock my world. I'll live with it for a little while.
Got it. Okay,
that kind of thing. And I have no problem with what they're doing with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And there are a lot of people who hate the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for a number of other reasons, but I've been there and I love it, and it's cool. And I think there's room for these artists that are not there yet, and these genres that they're trying to forge a place in the musical landscape of this country, because it is important to such a huge part of our population. And for some people, you know what? It rocks. That's what rocks for them.
Yeah.
And it's different from what rocks for me, but that doesn't mean that maybe it does not deserve, a place, or it shouldn't be enshrined there for its importance, for its reflection of our culture, or its meaning to a whole new generation.
Do you see it as a big deal when people are snubbed? Like, in terms of, I feel like there are certain Hall of Fames, if you're a sports fan. It seems like the Basketball Hall of Fame is a lot more inclusive, and it seems like it's a little easier to get into the Basketball Hall of Fame than it is to get into like the Baseball Hall of Fame. Cooperstown seems to be a little tougher to get into. And it seems like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's even more tricky because it's a subjective thing. There are benchmarks usually.
Exactly.
For baseball, it's like you have 3,000 hits. Usually that gets you into the Hall of Fame. That's sort of like it's a statistical number that you can analyze and say that this guy was good enough because of this, this, and this. Whereas with music, it doesn't. It kind of seems like even the idea of having the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in some ways is a little silly because it's like
all subjective.
Right, and certain people move units at different clips, and it doesn't necessarily, it's not their music might not be critically acclaimed. So what's the like who gets in based on whose taste? Is it a taste thing? Is it based on how big this person was? But I am curious because I think that at the least we get a cool concert every year where somebody shows up and it's like, Tom Petty will play with Jeff Lynne and they'll do a Randy Newman song, and you're just like, never thought I'd see this, So
or
in that aspect,
there were just like 60 guys on stage. I'm
like,
oh God.
Yeah,
that
first induction
band and everybody else, right?
Oh my God. Yeah, it's Springsteen and three of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones on stage together with Bob Dylan.
Schaefer, throw Lindsey Buckingham in there and exactly.
But as we move into this, there were some snubs. There are people that have like been sort of famously snubbed for a pretty long period of time. And I know that you've been trying to be very diplomatic about, like not having strong opinions. Right. But I know you're a music fan.
Have I answered even any of your questions? I'm going back to our conversation so far. I'm like, did I even answer that question?
You have. You've been great. No, you've been
awful.
A great guest. All right, but I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have 9 names here that stuck out to me that are people that are seemingly constantly getting snubbed. Some have been snubbed only for a couple of years. Some have been snubbed for 20 plus, and the ones that have been snubbed for 20 plus to me seem like they need to go in. But I'm curious to know. I'm just going to rattle off these names, and I'm just your opinion. Should they be in, and if you think that they should be in, will they get in?
Okay. All right. Let's see.
First name on this list, one of my all-time favorites, Warren Zevon. He's been eligible since '94, has not gotten in.
Right. Eclectic, I think, and I've read about Warren, and I know of Warren's past. I think he should be in.
Yeah, I agree.
I think Warren should definitely be in. Yeah.
I hope that they recognize that, because I know the other aspect of it is that he died so young that it seems like it should be not so young, but young enough where he could have had way more music come out, and we're just never going to get those albums.
Right. Exactly.
Pat Benatar, eligible since 1993.
Yeah. Huge influence. I think she won the fan vote, or she came in second in the fan vote last year, and she's not even on the ballot this year. So how is that working?
I don't get. This was a name that shocked me when I was looking at like the all-time snubs. I couldn't believe. I just figured that
shrouded in mystery. Yeah.
Yeah.
And probably one of the larger female forces in 80s pop music, and she also has written about some of the things that she's had to deal with in that era, getting played, getting recognized, what album covers were going to look like. Yeah, Pat, why it's not this year, especially after the fan vote so big last year, but I think her time is coming.
Yeah, I agree. I'm with you. All right. B-52s, eligible since 2004. You were there for more of the B-52s than I was. I heard more B-52s on like greatest hits of the 80s type stuff.
Right. They had a substantial number of hits. I saw them open for Cher. It was a great show. It was just when they were out first before Love Shack and all of that era, they were punk. They were that was alternative. The Rock Lobster era of things. And I'm zoning on some other songs that we would play, because when I first started, I was a part-time
Private Idaho, right?
Like a whole new wave kind of thing. And they were groundbreaking. It was
So
kind of really different. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. See, from my sphere of influence, I didn't realize that they were that big. They were always, to me, as someone who wasn't there for it, I always just remember the got me a girl. She's as big as a wet, like the weird voice and everything.
And roof.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
And so now look what everyone's doing, the TikTok dance. For TikTok alone this last year, they should be in.
Interesting point. Yeah, you're right. Kool and the Gang, eligible since 95.
I don't know why they're not in. I have no idea. Yeah.
Okay. So far I think we're 4 for 4 on should be in the Hall of Fame. Okay. Now we're starting to get to more current people, a little more current. I mean, know, they're not 90s isn't that current, but the Pixies, eligible since 2013.
I am not all that well versed on the Pixies discography or influence, so they are still fringe for me.
Okay,
I think that might be ignorance, really. But then again, when you're looking at the influence and the not just the exposure and how many people are aware, I don't know that the audience is there.
Right. Well, and I think the Pixies are one of the great examples of one of those bands where it's cool to like the Pixies, but do most people know more than maybe 2 or 3 Pixies songs? Right. And isn't that a benchmark to say, if you can rattle off a bunch of Kool and the Gang or B-52 songs, Pat Benatar, immediately you mentioned that name, you've like an image is burned into your head.
Oh, sure.
With the Pixies, it's sort of, like you said, they're kind of fringe. So doesn't that defeat the purpose of, they're almost like a utility man in baseball in some ways, where it's like, yeah, that guy was great, but Hall of Fame, I don't know.
Right. I concur.
Yeah, I feel this. Okay, good. Tribe Called Quest, eligible since 2015. Now we're moving into the rap stage.
I know. And this is where, as you could tell, I am so ill-equipped.
Yeah.
Ill-equipped. But from all of the things and all of the people that came from Tribe and all of their influence over the years, there's a place for them. There should be a place for them.
I agree. I think Tribe is they're a great example of, if you're thinking about it from the lens of who would induct a Tribe Called Quest into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, or who would induct X, whoever it is, I think I immediately go to thinking that Kanye West or Jay-Z or some huge megastar that's obviously going to be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame would be inducting them because of Q-Tip's influence and everything. And I think that alone adds to the mystique of the fact that they influenced somebody. So these stars that came at, I mean, they were huge in their own right, but if you have Jay-Z. But
you've used the key word twice already, and that's influence.
Right.
Who
exactly.
have they influenced? What path did they carve and create, and who came from that branch and from that standpoint alone?
Right. Okay. All right. So we're putting Tribe in. All right. 3 more here. Okay. Barry White, eligible since 99.
Man, you make me make a decision on Barry. I love Barry.
That's a tough one, isn't it?
Since 99?
Yeah.
Really? I guess he would be a person that I would think, in my imagination is already in.
That's what I thought too.
Just because of that legendary sound. I mean, he stands out.
Yeah.
The warmth, the era, what transpired while Barry's music was playing somewhere should be enough for some kind of Hall of Fame.
Yeah. I get you. He is the go-to guy for, I think it's him and Marvin Gaye when you put on feeling your girlfriend up music, Is
that their playlist for that? Okay.
I think we should make it maybe. All right. Next name, George Michael, eligible since 2011.
Wow. George Michael. Really?
Yeah.
Such a lengthy catalog. George is going to be more thoughts from eligible since 2011.
Yeah.
But like the Baseball Hall of Fame, I don't know that there's a point in time where they fall off the ballot, right? Is there?
I don't think so. I mean, Zevon's been on since 94 and Pat Benatar's been on since 93. So it's like, they haven't fallen off by now.
Right. I mean, I know to be in, has to be 25 years since your first recorded release.
Yeah, I believe that's right.
So they would have probably put George Michael on relatively early since the first, Wham material. If 2011, that would be like 1984 is 25 years. So he was probably, name gets out there first chance it can, and he's not in yet, really.
Yeah.
I could see there being a place for George.
I mean, he was huge in the 80s, right?
Yeah.
It's not just like this run that I'm misremembering. I mean, even the idea of those music videos, Faith, that's an iconic music video. I mean,
right. 2 minutes and 4 seconds of video perfection, I think, is enough to get him into the Hall of Fame right there.
Yeah, I'm with you too. I'm surprised that he wasn't in. That was one of those names where I was just like, this is kind of unbelievable to me, because I felt like he, again, I'm not there in the actual moment for a lot of these people, but I think that maybe that also is enough of an argument that the 30-year-old kid is like, George Michael's not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That's crazy to me,
Right.
Last name on this list. She's a little newer to being snubbed, but Mariah Carey, 2016, she's been eligible since.
Right. God, she's
some of the biggest songs of the 90s.
Absolutely.
And the biggest Christmas song ever.
Yep. Ever. And it comes back every year, and it will continue to. I mean, that song has its place in time, from here on out, quite honestly. Yes, absolutely. Mariah Carey, for the range.
Yeah.
For the amount of songs that reach just that level of mass appeal. And I know the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is not about mass appeal.
Yeah.
I know that's, not part of the thing, but if it's not in the hall, then how do you acknowledge all of,
Yeah. And I mean, realistically, she's got to be one of the first pop singers who is folding in hip hop artists into her mainstream major hits. I mean, how much did Jay-Z benefit from being on Heartbreaker? How much all these guys that were involved in her music.
Of the Tom Tom Club and stuff like that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's the end of the list. Race.
Right. Well, good.
Listen, I think the time for we've now almost maxed out 2 limited Zoom meetings.
Excellent. So everyone, good night.
I think it's time for us to get out of here.
I enjoyed this conversation.
I'm glad. I'm really. You were a great guest, by the way. I know you're not used to being a guest, but I can tell you were A+.
Oh, thank you very much. I think the only thing I really skirted was when did we start to see the digital age begin when it comes to the world of radio? And I can't pinpoint a spot, really.
Yeah.
It's almost always been, even when someone sends me a photo of their dashboard right now and it's got the CBS logo on there, I'm like, well, is that, but you're in, Tennessee or Detroit. And they're like, I've got it on with the radio.com app. It comes right through my dashboard. And that amazes me still.
Yeah.
So no matter how you get it, it's still going to be radio if you can listen to it in your car speakers.
Yeah. I get you, man. Well, that's a good reason to have skirted it if you can't pinpoint a specific thing.
It started to be photos. We need a photo for the internet. Then it was like you look the same in every photo. Is that your real smile? Do you show your teeth? I'm like, this is it.
Yeah.
I got into radio because of this.
Yeah.
This is the whole deal. So you know what? Put the picture up. Ask our friend Dan Mulqueen how fun it is to photograph and video me.
Shout out to Dan.
That's right.
Well, lucky for you, there will be pieces of this video on the internet somewhere. So you do look great, by the way. So I wouldn't sweat it if I were you. But
great.
Is there anything you'd like to plug before we get out of here that I didn't plug?
Just radio in general. You know what? Since the country world and all of their artists really seem to thank radio at every turn, the pop world seems to forget that. And being someone who's on the other side of the microphone or the MP3 or the CD or at once upon a time vinyl, I owe radio a tremendous amount of gratitude for my life, for my love of music. When you asked if I ever envisioned this for me, I know that I love music and I tried like crazy to be a professional gigging musician, and it came down to, well, if I can't play on the records, maybe I'll play the records, and I will surround my life with all of this art, which I love. That comes, whether it's in a 3-minute and 40-second package of a song or 12 seconds of the jock talking over the intro, using a part of a phone call and making me laugh. To me, it's all art. There's all a craft to it, and it all has a chance to make or break someone's day or mood or feeling, and that's why I'm in it. So thank you, radio.
Thank you, radio. And listeners, definitely, long story short, listen to the fucking radio, man. Listen to this first, but listen to the I got to make my money here, Race, but listen to the radio first.
I totally get it.
Race Taylor, thank you so much for being here. Listeners, please rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. You heard it at the first half of the episode. We appreciate you listening, and we'll see you again next week. Until then, goodbye.